The first thing I saw was my daughter-in-law balancing 3 dinner plates across one arm, while her other hand pressed against the underside of her 8-month belly. The second thing I saw was the young floor manager pointing toward a table and snapping. "They've been waiting 6 minutes. Claire, move." Her face had gone gray beneath the warm pendant lights, and one of her ankles was swollen so badly it bulged over the edge of her black work shoe. When the water glass slipped from her tray and shattered near my feet, she whispered something that stopped me colder than the November rain outside. "Please don't tell Ethan," I slowed down. I had come to Bennett's table expecting to drop off an insurance folder and surprise my son with coffee. Instead, I found myself wondering why his pregnant wife was terrified of being caught resting in a restaurant I had paid to build. "My name is Walter Bennett, and before I tell you what she said next, stay with me, because that sentence changed how I understood my own family. To explain why, I have to go back 4 years. I was 68 that fall, 3 years retired, and 5 years widowed. For most of my adult life, I had run a commercial kitchen supply company outside Columbus, Ohio. I sold ovens, refrigeration systems, steel prep tables, and every other expensive piece of machinery restaurant owners ignored until it failed on a Saturday night. The business had been good to me. It paid off my house, funded my retirement, and gave my only son, Ethan, opportunities I never had growing up. It also kept me away more than I like to admit. I missed baseball games, school conferences, and one Christmas morning because a hotel chain in Pittsburgh had a freezer disaster. My late wife, Linda, used to say, "You're always making sure the family has everything except you." I would kiss her forehead, promise the next year would be different, and then write another check. After she died, that sentence stayed with me. I tried to repair things with Ethan using the only language I had practiced consistently: money, introductions, and solutions that arrived before he learned how to solve anything himself. Ethan was 35, handsome in the polished way that made strangers trust him quickly. He could walk through a dining room, remember 6 names, compliment a woman's earrings, and convince a nervous investor that failure was just poor branding. When he told me he wanted to open a neighborhood restaurant, I saw it as more than a business. I thought it could become the thing that finally brought us closer. I bought an empty brick building in Grandview Heights through my property company, spent nearly $420,000 on renovation and equipment, then leased it to Ethan's company at a rate low enough to keep him alive through the first 2 years. He owned 70% of the operating company. Claire owned 30%. That had been my idea. A marriage should not make one person financially invisible. I told them when we signed the documents. Ethan laughed. Claire hugged me, and I believed I had done something wise. I did not understand that giving someone legal protection was not the same as making sure she felt safe enough to use it. Claire had been a public school art teacher before marrying Ethan. She was quieter than he was, but never weak. She noticed when a server was overwhelmed, remembered which customers had food allergies, and could calm Ethan when his ambition outran the numbers. During the restaurant's first year, she handled payroll after school and painted the mural in the back dining room herself. When she became pregnant, Ethan told me she had stepped back almost completely. He said she only reviewed invoices from home and occasionally stopped by to greet regulars. Whenever I offered to help, he gave the same answer: "We've got it, Dad. You already did enough." I wanted to respect his independence. I also enjoyed hearing him say he had things under control, because it let me believe the money had worked. Claire stopped answering my calls as often during the summer, but Ethan said pregnancy made her exhausted. She missed Sunday dinners, but he blamed nausea. By October, I had not seen her in nearly 6 weeks. I told myself young couples needed privacy. It was a reasonable explanation, which is often the kind of lie we accept most easily. The insurance folder that took me to the restaurant contained renewal forms for the building's liability policy. Ethan had ignored 3 emails, and the broker needed his signature by Monday. I called twice that afternoon. He did not answer. At 7:30, I decided to drive over. The rain had started as mist and turned heavy enough to blur the streetlights by the time I parked behind the kitchen. Bennett's table looked healthy from outside. Every booth was occupied, and a dozen people waited beneath the awning. That mattered because Ethan had recently mentioned tight margins and asked whether I might defer 2 months of rent. I had agreed without asking for records. Inside, the hostess recognized me and stiffened before forcing a smile. That should have warned me. So should the way two servers glanced toward the kitchen when I asked where Ethan was. Investor dinner, the hostess said. Cincinnati. Ethan had told me that morning he planned to stay home with Claire because she was having back pain. Before I could ask another question, I saw Claire emerge from the kitchen carrying the tray. She wore a black uniform shirt stretched tightly across her stomach and a stained apron tied below it. Her hair, usually neat, was pinned up with a plastic clip. Loose strands stuck to her forehead. She moved carefully, but not slowly enough for Derek Shaw, the floor manager. Derek was 27 and had been hired 6 months earlier. I remembered Ethan praising him as aggressive about efficiency, a phrase that had sounded impressive over lunch and ugly in person. Table 12 needs the salmon, Derek said, tapping his watch. Claire answered, I need 30 seconds. The baby's pressing on my ribs. Derek glanced toward the kitchen doors and lowered his voice. Though not enough. Your husband said no special treatment during service. That was when the glass fell. It hit the tile, exploded, and sent a shard sliding against my shoe. Claire looked up. For 1 second, she did not recognize me. Then every bit of color left her face. Walter, she breathed. Not Dad. Not even Mr. Bennett. Just my name. Spoken like I had arrived to inspect a crime she had committed. I stepped between her and the broken glass. Put the tray down. She shook her head. I'm fine. Her knees bent slightly as she said it. I took the tray from her before she could object and handed it to a passing server. Derek approached with the irritated confidence of a man who had not yet realized whose building he was standing in. Sir, customers can't be in the service lane. I looked at his name tag. Then at Claire. Find someone to cover her tables. He swallowed. We're short tonight. Then cover them yourself. Claire touched my sleeve. Please. Walter, don't make this worse. Those words bothered me more than Derek's attitude. I had not raised my voice. I had not accused anyone. Yet Claire reacted as though my presence alone carried consequences. I guided her toward the employee break room, a narrow space behind the pantry with 2 metal chairs and a humming refrigerator. She lowered herself onto one chair and pressed both palms to her stomach. When did you last eat? I asked. She stared at the floor. Around noon. It was nearly 9. I filled a paper cup with water and watched her drink in small, careful sips. Up close, I saw dark circles under her eyes and a faint red mark where the apron string had cut into her skin. Where is Ethan? I asked. Cincinnati. He told me he was home with you. Her eyes lifted quickly, then dropped again. Plans changed. Why are you serving tables? Someone called out. You're 8 months pregnant. 33 weeks. She corrected me automatically, as if the exact number made the situation more reasonable. I asked how often she had been working. Not often. Then, after a pause, 4 or 5 nights. A month her silence answered me. I felt anger move through my chest. But age had taught me, anger was most useful before it reached the mouth. I kept my voice level. You're leaving. I'll drive you home. Claire gripped the cup hard enough to bend it. I can't leave during a shift. You just nearly collapsed. I'll sit 10 minutes. No, this is finished. Her breathing changed. She was not relieved. She was frightened. She looked toward the closed door before speaking. Ethan said we can't afford another bad week. I told her the dining room was full. She answered that revenue was not the same as cash, a phrase Ethan often used when asking me for help. The loan payments are behind. She said, vendors are calling. Payroll was almost late twice. None of that matched the limited reports I had seen. But I let her continue. Ethan says I caused part of it. I made ordering mistakes when the pregnancy got difficult. Too much seafood. Duplicate produce deliveries. Inventory we couldn't use. He said I have to help fix it. Claire had always been meticulous. She was the woman who checked a grocery receipt before leaving the parking lot. How much does he say you lost? I asked. I don't know exactly. Her eyes filled. He keeps finding more. I told her mistakes happened, and that no restaurant debt required a woman at 33 weeks pregnant to carry hot plates. She whispered, "It isn't only the restaurant." Then she stopped as footsteps passed outside the room. I waited until the hallway went quiet. What else? Claire rubbed her thumb along the paper cup's rim. The house. I reminded her that the mortgage was small because Linda and I had given them a substantial wedding gift toward the purchase. That doesn't mean there are no risks, she said. Ethan explained the arrangement. I asked what arrangement she meant. Her expression changed from fear to confusion, as if she could not understand why I was making her say something I should already know. He said, if I stopped contributing, you would sell the house and take back what you put into it. For several seconds, the refrigerator motor was the only sound in the room. I cannot sell your house, I said. My name is not on the deed. Claire stared at me. I continued. I gave you that money. It was not a loan. There is no repayment clause. Her lower lip began to tremble. Ethan said you kept control through the restaurant lease. He said you could ruin us whenever you wanted. Claire, I have never threatened that. She looked toward the door again. He said you would deny it if I ever confronted you. That was the sentence that split the evening in two. Everything before it had been concern. Everything after it became something colder. I asked her exactly what Ethan had told her about me. At first, she resisted. Then the details came in pieces. He had said I believed she married him for money. He had said I regretted giving her 30% of the company. He had said I wanted a paternity test because the baby didn't feel like a Bennett. He had even claimed I refused to visit because I considered her pregnancy an inconvenience. Each lie explained a memory I had filed away without understanding. Claire leaving a family dinner early. Claire declining my offer to attend an ultrasound. Claire going silent whenever I mentioned the restaurant. Ethan had not simply kept us apart. He had used the shape of my real flaws to make his lies believable. I had been controlling in business. I had used money to influence decisions. I had doubted people before. My son knew which version of me Claire would fear, because I had spent years teaching him where that version lived. I need to call him, I said. Claire reached across the small table and grabbed my wrist. Please don't tell him I said any of this. Her fingers were cold. Why? Because he'll say I'm turning you against him. He'll say I'm unstable again. The word again caught me. Has he said that before? She released my wrist. Only when I get emotional. Emotional? About what? Money? The baby? Vanessa calling late? Anything. I knew the name Vanessa vaguely. Ethan had described her as a branding consultant. I asked whether she worked for the restaurant. Claire said she did not know. Ethan handled those meetings privately. Before I could press further, Claire winced and folded forward. Her hand tightened around the edge of the table. I stood. Is that a contraction? Probably Braxton Hicks. How many today? She did not answer quickly enough. I took out my phone and called my physician's after-hours line, then changed my mind and dialed the hospital. Claire protested until another wave of pain crossed her face. After that, she let me help her stand. Derek tried to stop us near the kitchen, saying he needed Claire to sign her checkout report. I told him he could place it on the desk and wait until she had been examined. He said, Mr. Bennett. Ethan gave clear instructions. I turned to him. Then Ethan can explain those instructions to the hospital. The dining room had quieted enough that several customers were watching. I did not want a spectacle, so I lowered my voice. You will not ask her to lift another tray tonight. You will not call her about covering tomorrow. Do you understand? Derek's face reddened, but he nodded. In the parking lot, Claire moved slowly beneath my umbrella. Halfway to the car, she stopped and said, You shouldn't have done that in front of everyone. Protected you? I asked. Challenged Ethan. The answer revealed more than she intended. I opened the passenger door and helped her inside. As I fastened the seatbelt beneath her belly, I noticed her phone lighting up repeatedly in her purse. Ethan's name appeared 4 times. She turned the screen face down without answering. At Riverside Methodist, a nurse took Claire to maternity triage while I completed the emergency contact information. I was not listed. Ethan was. So was a number belonging to someone named Vanessa Cole under business emergency, which struck me as unusual enough to remember. The doctor later told us Claire was dehydrated and severely overworked. The baby's heartbeat was stable, but the contractions were real. She needed fluids, monitoring, and strict limits on lifting. No restaurant shifts. The doctor said, not fewer shifts. None. Claire nodded, though she looked as if she were being sentenced rather than relieved. I sat beside the bed and watched rain stripe the window. There are moments when a man sees the total of his neglect without needing anyone to calculate it. I had given Ethan a building, equipment, credit, and reputation. I had never once asked Claire whether she felt safe in the life those gifts created. I had mistaken distance for respect because respect required less courage than asking questions whose answers might accuse me. Ethan arrived just before midnight, wearing a charcoal blazer and no raincoat. He crossed the room quickly, kissed Claire's forehead, and asked the nurse 3 informed questions that made him look attentive. Then he turned to me. What happened? I told him exactly what I had seen. His expression tightened. She was covering the dinner rush for an hour. Claire stared at the blanket. She said 4 or 5 nights a week. I replied. Ethan looked at her. Not me. You must be confused. Claire's shoulders drew inward. He explained that pregnancy had made her anxious and forgetful. He said she insisted on helping because she hated feeling useless. When I mentioned Derek's treatment, Ethan, Seahead, Derek is direct. Dad, you're seeing one moment and building a whole story because you never trusted me to run the place. Then he used the truth as a weapon. He reminded me I had missed half his childhood and now wanted to play protector in his marriage. The accusation landed because part of it belonged to me. That was why I did not strike back. The doctor returned and repeated the work restrictions. Ethan agreed immediately, his hand resting on Claire's shoulder. Of course, he said. Her health comes first. He sounded so reasonable that I understood how easily doubt could be made to look like cruelty. I asked about the restaurant's finances. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Not here. You said cash was tight. We're restructuring. What does that mean? It means I'm handling it. Claire whispered. Ethan. The loan, he interrupted gently. Not tonight. Sweetheart. I watched the tenderness in his tone and the warning underneath it. An hour later, when the nurse discharged Claire, Ethan went to bring the car around. I helped gather her belongings. Her purse tipped from the chair, spilling tissues, prenatal vitamins, a wallet, and a white envelope stamped final notice. Claire bent to grab it, but I reached it first. The document inside was from a regional bank. A business loan for $185,000 was 60 days past due. Both Ethan's and Claire's names appeared as borrowers. Claire read over my shoulder, her face tightening with each line. I've never seen that, she said. I pointed to the signature page. Her name appeared in a clean electronic script beneath a date from February. Did you authorize Ethan to sign for you? She shook her head. Did you approve this loan online? No. At the bottom of the page was the verification address used to confirm the transaction. It looked like Claire's name, but the domain belonged to Bennett's Table's internal office server. Claire had never used that server for personal email. I knew because I had paid the technology company that installed it. The account could only have been created by someone with administrative access. Ethan had that access. So did Derek. I folded the notice, returned it to the envelope, and felt the last of my uncertainty settle into something firm. My son had lied about where he was, lied about his wife's labor, lied about my threats, and someone had placed Claire's name on a debt she did not know existed. When Ethan's headlights swept across the hospital entrance, I understood that confronting him in the parking lot would only warn him. For the first time that night, I said nothing. I did not confront Ethan in the hospital parking lot, because anger would have given him exactly what he needed, proof that I was the unstable, controlling father he had described to Claire. Instead, I handed her purse back, waited until she was safely in the passenger seat, and told Ethan I would call the next morning. He studied my face as though trying to measure what I knew. Dad, don't turn this into one of your investigations, he said. Claire needs calm right now. I nodded once and watched him drive away through the rain. Then I sat in my car for nearly 10 minutes with the bank notice copied in my mind. The loan amount, the February date, the false email address. and Claire's fear all pointed in the same direction. But pointing was not proving. I had spent my career watching restaurant owners destroy themselves by reacting before checking the numbers. So I forced myself to do what I had advised others for years. I went home, made coffee at 1 in the morning, and opened every file I still had on Bennett's table. By 6:30, I had spread 4 years of leases, equipment schedules, insurance certificates, and operating reports across my dining room table. The original lease was clear. My property company owned the building and the installed equipment. Ethan's operating company owned the restaurant brand, inventory, payroll accounts, and daily business. The house where Ethan and Claire lived was not connected to the restaurant at all. Linda and I had given them a down payment gift at their wedding, properly documented with the bank. There was no hidden lien, no repayment clause, and no mechanism through which I could sell the house. Ethan's story to Claire was not an exaggeration. It was an invention. The loan was more complicated. As a minority owner, Claire could be liable if she had truly signed. If she had not, then someone had committed fraud using her identity. I called Marianne Holt at 7. She had handled my company's books for 22 years and had the rare ability to sound skeptical before hearing the problem. "You're calling before sunrise," she said. "So either you're dying or Ethan finally made you read a statement." Marianne arrived an hour later, carrying a leather folder and 2 breakfast sandwiches. She was 59, compact, silver-haired, and impossible to charm when numbers were wrong. I showed her the final notice, copying the details from the photograph I had taken while Claire was changing at the hospital. Marianne read it twice. "You did not take the original?" she asked. I told her no. "Good. We don't want Ethan knowing which document exposed him." She asked whether Claire had denied signing in front of anyone else. I said only me. Marianne reminded me that denial alone was not enough. Electronic signatures often came with authorization logs, device records, and verification steps. We needed lawful access, not guesswork. She also asked the question I had been avoiding. Why would Ethan need $185,000 if the restaurant is full? I said. He claimed cash flow problems. Marianne looked toward the reports on the table. Then where are the last 8 months of financial statements? I admitted I had stopped requesting them after Ethan accused me of treating him like an employee. Marianne did not criticize me. She simply said, "Your guilt has become part of his internal control system." At 9, Ethan called. His voice was calm and tired, carefully arranged to suggest a husband carrying too much. "Claire's sleeping," he said. "The doctor scared her, but she's fine." I asked whether I could speak to her later. He paused. "I think she needs space from both of us." I asked directly about the loan. Silence lasted 1 second too long. "She told you?" he asked. I saw the notice. Ethan exhaled as if I were the unreasonable one. "It was a working capital loan. She agreed to it." I told him Claire said she had never seen it. "She forgets things lately," he replied. Pregnancy brain is real. The casual cruelty of that sentence nearly pulled me into a fight. Instead, I asked why the verification email came from the restaurant's internal server. He said the bank required a business address. I asked who created the account. "Probably Derek or our IT contractor." He said, "Dad, this is exactly what I mean. You see a late notice and assume I'm stealing from my wife." I answered, "I haven't assumed anything. I'm asking for the loan file." His tone hardened. "You're not entitled to it." He invited me to the house that afternoon, though invited was generous. He said we needed to establish boundaries. When I arrived, Claire sat on the living room sofa with a blanket over her legs and a glass of water on the table. Ethan sat close enough that his knee touched hers. The arrangement looked intimate until I noticed Claire's phone lying beside him. Not her. He began by saying the hospital incident had been embarrassing. "You overruled my manager in front of customers." He told me, "You made Claire look incapable." I replied that she had nearly collapsed. Ethan said she had insisted on helping because she felt guilty about inventory mistakes. Claire glanced at him before nodding. I asked her whether she remembered approving the loan. Ethan answered for her. "We discussed it in January." I looked only at Claire. She rubbed one thumb against the edge of the blanket. I remember talking about financing, she said slowly. I don't remember signing anything. Ethan leaned back. Because I handled the paperwork, like you asked. Claire's face tightened, but she did not challenge him. I placed a copy of the house gift letter on the coffee table. Claire, this money was a gift. Your house is not mine to take. Ethan's jaw flexed. Why are you doing this? I told him, because Claire believed otherwise. He turned toward her with wounded disbelief. You told him that, she whispered. I was scared. Ethan stood and walked to the window, performing pain with his back to us. I was trying to explain financial exposure. He said, Dad owns the building. If he pulls the lease, the business fails. If the business fails, we can't pay the mortgage. She twisted that into him selling the house. Claire started to apologize. I stopped her. Did you tell her I thought the baby might not be mine to accept as family? Ethan turned around quickly. Claire closed her eyes. That was a joke, he said. A terrible joke. Maybe. But she knows how you are about bloodlines. I had never spoken about bloodlines in my life. The lie was absurd. Yet he delivered it with enough confidence to make the room feel uncertain. Then Ethan reached for the part of our history he knew I could not easily defend. You missed my graduation dinner because of a refrigeration contract, he said. You sent Mom alone to my first apartment. You ignored me for 20 years. And now you show up with paperwork, acting like Claire's savior. His voice did not rise. That made the accusation more effective. Claire looked between us, and I saw her begin to wonder whether she had caused the confrontation. Ethan continued, You don't care about her. You care that someone might be mishandling something you paid for. There was enough truth inside that sentence to hurt. I had often cared for people through property, bills, tuition, and repairs. I had trusted money because money obeyed rules. People did not. I told him, You're right that I was absent. You're wrong if you think that gives you permission to use my failures against your wife. His eyes sharpened. There it is. You've already chosen her side. Claire whispered his name, but he held up a hand without looking at her. I asked for the restaurant's financial reports, the loan application, and bank statements showing how the funds were spent. Ethan laughed once. You're my landlord, not my auditor. I reminded him that I was also guarantor on several equipment accounts and that 2 deferred rent payments were already outstanding. He said the rent delay was temporary. I asked why a busy restaurant could not pay below market rent. He answered with a lecture about food costs, labor shortages, and expansion expenses. The last phrase caught me. What expansion? I asked. Ethan's expression changed only slightly. Brand development. Claire looked at him. You said we were stabilizing. He placed a hand on her shoulder. That's what I mean. Then he turned to me and said the conversation was over. He wanted me to leave and not contact Claire privately. She needs rest, not interrogation, he said. I stood, buttoned my coat, and looked at Claire. You can call me any time, Ethan answered. She won't need to. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking. Not from anger, but from the effort of keeping it contained. The next morning, Marianne and I began with records we could access legally. My property company had copies of rent payments, equipment maintenance bills, insurance claims, and certain monthly sales summaries required under the lease. Those summaries showed the restaurant's gross revenue had increased nearly 12% over the previous year. That did not guarantee profit, but it contradicted Ethan's picture of a business barely surviving. Vendor complaints told another story. The produce distributor had sent 2 late payment notices to the building address. A linen company had suspended service for 3 days. The refrigeration contractor, an old colleague of mine, said Ethan had delayed paying a repair invoice while ordering cosmetic upgrades for a private dining area. He's spending somewhere, Marianne said, just not where the restaurant needs it. We compared the last full statement from 8 months earlier with the limited sales summaries that followed. Labor expenses had dropped. Revenue had risen, yet cash reserves had disappeared. Something was pulling money out faster than ordinary operations could explain. I visited Bennett's table on Thursday morning under the legitimate pretext of inspecting the fire suppression system. The kitchen smelled of onions, bleach, and fresh bread. Staff members were polite but guarded. Derek followed me from room to room, answering questions I had not asked. He said staffing had been difficult. Claire volunteered too much, and Ethan was working constantly behind the scenes. I noticed 2 convection ovens listed on my equipment schedule were missing from the storage area. Derek claimed they had been sent for servicing. There were no service tags, work orders, or temporary replacements. In the office, stacks of unpaid invoices sat beneath a framed magazine article about Ethan's success. I asked where the monthly rent checks were. Derek said Ethan handled all financial matters off-site now. Before we left the office, a server named Monica passed the doorway and quietly said, "Tell Claire I hope she's okay." Derek snapped, "Back to work." Monica flinched. I watched her walk away and understood that fear had become part of the restaurant's daily culture. Near the rear exit, I asked Derek how often Claire had worked without clocking in. He denied that she ever did. I pointed to handwritten shift changes pinned beside the schedule. Her initials appeared on 5 evenings in the previous week, but payroll printouts showed no corresponding hours. Derek's face reddened. "Owners don't clock in," he said. "Claire owns 30%. I replied. "Then why does she take instructions from you?" He looked toward the kitchen before answering. "Ethan said she needed structure." That phrase sounded rehearsed. I asked whether Ethan had instructed staff not to call me. Derek said no, then immediately added, "Unless it involved tenant matters." I had not mentioned phone calls. His mistake told me enough. I ended the inspection without accusation and photographed the equipment areas as permitted under the lease. Outside, Monica approached while pretending to take trash to the dumpster. She worked almost every night this month. She whispered, "Sometimes until close." Ethan said family doesn't get overtime. Before I could ask more, Derek opened the back door, and Monica walked away. That afternoon, Claire called from an unknown number. Her voice was low. "I'm using the pharmacy phone," she said. "Ethan has mine because he says the stress is bad for me." I asked whether she was safe. She answered too quickly. "Yes." Then, she apologized for the scene at the house. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. "He says you're freezing us out," she whispered. "He says you'll cancel the lease unless I support him." I told her I had taken no action against the restaurant. "He says you will." I asked about the ordering mistakes. Claire said Ethan had shown her reports with duplicate seafood purchases and spoiled inventory. She had no copies because he managed the software now. She sounded ashamed when she said, "Maybe I really did it. I was so tired." I reminded her that exhaustion did not create loans or false email accounts. Before she could respond, I heard a door open on her end. Ethan's voice asked, "Who are you talking to?" Claire said. "The pharmacist." Then the line went dead. I drove halfway to their house before turning around. Marianne had warned me that arriving without invitation could help Ethan portray me as threatening. I hated that she was right. Instead, we traced the business names appearing in the expense summaries available through the equipment guarantee file. Most were ordinary produce: meat, cleaning supplies, software, credit card processing. One appeared repeatedly under consulting expenses, Northline Hospitality Consulting. The payments began 9 months earlier at $6,000, then grew to 12, 18, and eventually 22,000 in a single month. The descriptions were vague: brand strategy, concept development, market positioning. I remembered seeing a Northline card in Ethan's car during the summer. He had told me it belonged to a public relations specialist. Marianne searched Ohio's public business registry. The company had been formed 9 months earlier, matching the first payment. Its registered owner was Vanessa Cole. I remembered the hospital intake form, where Vanessa's number appeared as a business emergency contact. Marianne leaned back from the computer. "That is an unusual amount of access for a consultant." We totaled the payments using every statement and ledger fragment within our lawful reach. In 8 months, Bennett's table had transferred $146,000 to Northline. The number sat on Marianne's screen like an accusation. It was close enough to the loan proceeds to suggest a direct connection. But we still needed proof. Marianne searched public filings connected to Vanessa and found promotional photographs from a regional hospitality event in Cincinnati. In one image, Ethan stood beside her beneath a banner for emerging restaurant concepts. His hand rested at the small of her back. That alone proved nothing. Business partners posed closely all the time. Then Marianne enlarged the table placard in front of them. It did not say Bennett's Table. It said Ember House Founders Preview. Ethan had never mentioned Ember House to me or, based on her reaction at the house, to Claire. In the background of another photograph stood a rendering of a high-end dining room and a line of text describing a new flagship concept led by restaurateur Ethan Bennett and creative strategist Vanessa Cole. Marianne printed the page and placed it beside the late loan notice. "The restaurant is not short because it is failing," she said. "It may be short because Ethan is funding something else." I looked at the dates. The first Northline payment occurred 2 weeks after the electronic loan had been approved. The amount transferred over 8 months was nearly the amount still missing from the loan. Claire had been carrying plates, blaming herself for imaginary inventory losses, while Ethan moved money toward another venture. Yet the worst part was not the theft. It was the architecture around it, the false threats in my name, the isolation, the claim that Claire was forgetful, the insistence that she work without pay. These were not separate bad decisions. They supported one another. I felt the urge to call Ethan, tell him what I had found, and demand he explain every dollar. Instead, I folded the Ember House printout and placed it in a file. The betrayal was no longer a single lie told in panic. It was a system, and systems had to be taken apart carefully. I spent Friday morning studying the Ember House materials until the polished language began to reveal what it was hiding. The presentation called Ethan, the sole founder of Bennett's Table, described the restaurant as a debt-free success, and listed its equipment, customer base, and brand reputation as assets available to support the new concept. None of that was entirely true. He owned 70% of the operating company, not the building or most of the equipment, and the debt-free claim ignored the loan carrying Claire's unauthorized signature. What troubled me most was a sentence near the bottom of the investor page. The founders anticipate monetizing their existing hospitality interests during the transition period. In plain English, Ethan planned to pull value from Bennett's Table and leave something behind. Marianne tapped the phrase with her pen. "He cannot sell the property," she said. "He cannot legally sell Claire's shares, but he can drain cash, move relationships, and make the old company worthless." I understood then that the empty shell might be intended for Claire. We drove to Cincinnati that afternoon, not to follow Ethan but to verify the business address printed on Northline's invoices. It belonged to a shared office complex above a renovated warehouse near the river. The receptionist confirmed that Northline rented conference rooms there and that Ember House frequently received deliveries of design samples. She would not give us private records, nor did I ask. Public information was enough. In the lobby stood a display board advertising future restaurant openings. Ember House was listed for the following spring, with Ethan's name beneath managing partner and Vanessa's beneath creative director. There was no mention of Claire. A rendering showed dark wood, brass fixtures, and custom ovens identical to 2 units missing from Bennett's Table. I recognized the model numbers because I had ordered them myself. Ethan had not sent those ovens for repair. He had moved them into a project he did not own yet. I photographed the public display, and Marianne quietly recorded the address and date. The receptionist mentioned that an investor preview had taken place the previous week. "Mr. Bennett gave a compelling presentation," she said. "He spoke about building the first restaurant from nothing." I thanked her and felt something inside me settle into grief. My son had not only taken my money, he had erased it from the story he told about himself. That should have made me furious, but mostly it made me tired. I remembered Ethan, at 14, standing in our garage after denting Linda's car. He had insisted a shopping cart rolled into it until I showed him the paint on his bicycle handlebar. Instead of making him repair the damage from his savings, I paid for the bodywork and told him not to worry his mother. At 22, he ran up a credit card balance, and I cleared it before Linda knew. At 28, a catering venture failed, and I covered the vendor bills. Each time, I called it protection. Looking back, I had been teaching him that consequences were debts someone else would eventually pay. Claire agreed to meet us on Saturday only after Marianne arranged a private room at her accounting office and promised Ethan would not be contacted. Claire arrived in a rideshare wearing a long gray coat and carrying a grocery bag instead of a purse. She said Ethan had begun checking her phone, so she left it at home and told him she was attending a prenatal class. Her face looked thinner than it had at the hospital. Marianne offered food, and Claire ate half a sandwich before we discussed anything. I showed her the Ember House images. She studied the photograph of Ethan and Vanessa for a long time, then said, "He told me Cincinnati was about refinancing Bennett's table." Her voice remained level, but one hand moved over her belly in slow circles. I asked whether she knew Vanessa personally. Claire said they had met twice. Vanessa had complimented her mural and asked whether she planned to keep working after the baby. Ethan answered before I could. Claire said, "He told her motherhood was going to be my full-time job." Claire brought printed screenshots of messages Ethan had sent during the previous 6 months. She had forwarded them to an old email account after the hospital visit. In one, Ethan wrote, "My father thinks your shares were a sentimental mistake." In another, he claimed I had demanded proof that the baby was his before making any additional family gifts. A third message warned that I could terminate the lease if Claire questioned financial decisions. The wording sounded almost like me, formal, blunt, and focused on control, which was why the lies had worked. Ethan knew my habits well enough to imitate them. Claire admitted she had begun avoiding me because she feared every conversation was an evaluation. When you asked about the ultrasound, she said, "I thought you were checking dates." I closed my eyes briefly. I had asked because I wanted to attend. My son had turned an awkward attempt at affection into evidence of suspicion. That realization hurt more deeply than any missing money. Marianne then asked Claire to explain the inventory losses Ethan blamed on her. Claire said the problems began in February, shortly after the loan date. Ethan showed her reports listing duplicate seafood orders, excess produce, and expensive meat that supposedly spoiled before service. He said pregnancy fatigue had made her careless. Claire had access to the bookkeeping software then, but after she tried to trace the invoices, Ethan changed the administrator password and told her she needed rest. I believed him. She said, "I had forgotten appointments. I once left my keys in the freezer at home, so when he showed me numbers, I thought maybe I had done more damage than I remembered." Ethan calculated the losses at nearly $90,000. Though he never gave her a complete report. He told her the only way to protect their home and her ownership stake was to work unpaid until the restaurant recovered. Marianne asked whether Claire had placed orders from home. She said never after 9 at night. That answer mattered because several questionable purchases had timestamps after midnight, with Claire's written authorization as a 30% owner. Marianne requested a lawful export of the company data from the accounting software provider. The provider could not give us bank records without formal procedures, but it supplied access logs and transaction histories tied to Claire's ownership rights. The pattern appeared within an hour. The duplicate orders were entered through Ethan's administrator account, usually between 11 at night and 2 in the morning. Some were never transmitted to actual vendors. They existed only as internal entries, later reversed or reassigned as spoilage. Several invoices came from suppliers that had no matching registration or delivery record. Claire had not created the losses. Someone had manufactured the appearance of them. Marianne leaned toward the screen and said, "These entries were designed to blame a specific user without using her login." Claire stared at the dates. On many of those nights, Ethan had told her he was asleep beside her. In reality, he had been accessing the system remotely from Cincinnati. The discovery changed the shape of everything. Ethan was not merely hiding an affair or moving money impulsively. He had built a story in which Claire was financially incompetent, emotionally unstable, and indebted to him for protecting her mistakes. That story served several purposes. It kept her working without pay, discouraged her from examining the books, and created a record he might later use in a divorce or ownership dispute. Claire began crying without sound. He kept saying he was trying to save me from your reaction. She whispered. I told her the truth as plainly as I could. There was no reaction to save you from. He invented me as the threat so you would accept him as your protector. Saying it aloud forced me to recognize why the strategy had succeeded. Ethan used my reputation because I had spent decades being decisive without always being gentle. Claire had never heard me threaten her, but she had seen me end vendor contracts, fire managers, and control negotiations. My son had weaponized a version of me that I had helped create. Claire reached into the grocery bag and removed a folder. Inside was a document titled Temporary Equity Reorganization Agreement. Ethan had given it to her 3 days earlier and said it would simplify financing before the baby arrived. The agreement would transfer her 30% ownership into a holding company managed exclusively by Ethan. It called the transfer temporary, but another section gave the holding company authority to sell, pledge, or dilute the interest without Claire's approval. A final clause required disputes to be handled through private arbitration selected by the company. He told me every investor requires this. Claire said. Marianne replied. No competent attorney representing you would advise signing it. Claire had delayed because one sentence referred to continuity following domestic restructuring. When she asked Ethan whether that meant divorce, he accused her of paranoia. The document was not proof of his entire plan, but it showed preparation. He expected to control her shares before Ember House opened, and he wanted that control before she had time to recover from childbirth. I asked Claire whether she wanted to leave Ethan immediately. She looked toward the window and said, I don't know what I want. I only know I can't sign that. Her uncertainty frustrated the part of me trained to solve crises quickly, but I understood that telling her what to do would repeat the same control we were trying to expose. Marianne helped her contact an independent family law attorney and secure copies of personal documents, medical records, and ownership agreements. We did not move money, alter accounts, or take anything from the marital home. Every action had to be defensible. Claire also wrote a dated statement explaining that she had not authorized the loan or the equity transfer. Her attorney would advise on the rest. Before leaving, she asked me a question I had not prepared for. Why did Ethan become this way? I could have blamed ambition, Vanessa, or fear of failure. Instead, I said, because I kept saving him from the part of failure that teaches a person who he is. That confession did not excuse Ethan, but it was true. After Linda died, I had doubled the pattern. I offered the restaurant because I wanted to feel useful to my son. When Ethan missed rent, I deferred it. When his first manager quit, I found a replacement. When vendors questioned his credit, I gave references. I called these acts love because love sounded better than guilt. Yet every rescue strengthened his belief that people existed to preserve his future. Claire had become another resource. Her labor, her shares, her credibility. Even her pregnancy could be used as long as he called it sacrifice. I told her, I cannot undo what I taught him. I can stop financing what he is doing now. Claire nodded but did not offer forgiveness. I was grateful she did not. Easy forgiveness would have been another false payment. A way to close an account without facing the real balance. She left through the rear entrance, and Marianne watched until the rideshare turned the corner. Our next step required patience. If I confronted Ethan with the logs and the agreement, he would destroy records, move the remaining assets, and portray Claire as conspiring with me. We needed him to disclose his plan voluntarily. Ember House gave us a path. Ethan believed I had money, industry connections, and a deep need to repair our relationship. All three were true. I called him Sunday evening and apologized not for investigating, but for allowing the hospital confrontation to become personal. I said I had been thinking about his accusation that I never trusted him. Then I mentioned seeing a public notice about Ember House in Cincinnati. Silence stretched across the line. I was going to tell you, he said. I replied that the concept looked impressive. His caution softened immediately. He explained that Bennett's Table had reached its ceiling and that Ember House could become a regional brand. I asked why he had hidden it. Because you would have tried to control it, he said. I told him perhaps I had been wrong to control so much. I offered to consider investing, provided he gave me a complete presentation. Ethan's voice changed from defensive to energized. He spoke about locations, private dining, celebrity chefs, and expansion into 3 cities. He said Vanessa had attracted serious interest, but that a strong anchor investor would allow them to keep ownership. I asked how much he needed. Around 600,000. He answered after a pause. The number was large enough to expose everything. I told him I might invest that amount if the structure was sound and if the existing restaurant's liabilities were properly addressed. Ethan said he could prepare the documents within 2 weeks. I suggested using Marianne to review them because she already knew the history. He hesitated, then agreed. Greed had begun outrunning caution. Before ending the call, he said, "I knew you'd eventually see what I was building." I looked at Linda's photograph on my desk and answered, "I'm beginning to see it very clearly." The plan was simple in theory. Ethan would believe he had regained control over me. To obtain the investment, he would have to present the Ember House ownership structure, explain the North Line payments, identify the source of its equipment, and disclose how Bennett's table and Claire's shares fit into the transaction. We would not trap him with invented conditions. We would ask ordinary questions any legitimate investor would ask. His own answers would reveal whether the misrepresentations were accidental or deliberate. Marianne warned that he might produce sanitized documents and keep the damaging ones hidden. I said that was possible. But even omissions could matter if we already had records showing the opposite. Claire's attorney advised her not to attend early meetings. Ethan needed to think she remained isolated and uncertain. For the first time since the hospital, I felt we had a direction that did not depend on shouting, luck, or threats. Then, on Tuesday night, Claire failed to call her attorney at the agreed time. At 7 the next morning, a courier delivered a letter from a law firm representing Ethan. It accused me of harassing Claire, interfering with their marriage, misusing landlord access, and attempting to destabilize Bennett's table for personal leverage. The letter demanded that I communicate only through counsel and warned that Ethan would seek a protective order if I contacted Claire directly. A second envelope contained notice that the restaurant would withhold rent because my inspections had allegedly disrupted operations. By noon, one equipment lender called about a missed payment tied to my old guarantee. Ethan was not simply defending himself. He was positioning me as the abuser while shifting financial pressure onto my property company. Marianne read the letters and said, "He knows Claire met someone." I asked how. The answer arrived from Claire's attorney an hour later. A neighborhood security camera had recorded Marianne's car outside Claire's meeting location. And Ethan had confronted her. He had taken Claire away from the house, claiming she needed protection from me. Her phone was off. No one knew where she was. I stood in my office with the legal letters spread across the desk and felt the advantage disappear. Ethan had Claire, the operating accounts, the staff, and access to every system inside the restaurant. I had evidence, but much of it required Claire's cooperation, and she was suddenly unreachable. If I terminated the lease, he would say I was retaliating. If I entered the building again, he might call the police and create the public scene he needed. If I paid the overdue equipment accounts, I would keep funding the scheme. For the first time since seeing Claire carry that tray, I wondered whether restraint had become another form of cowardice. Then Marianne pointed to the Ember House proposal lying beneath the attorney's letter. "He still wants your 600,000, she said. "That is the one door he has not closed." I looked at Ethan's signature on the demand that I stay away from my own family and understood the price of entering that door. To expose him, I would have to let him believe he had already won. I answered Ethan's attorney through counsel and gave him almost everything he appeared to want. I agreed not to contact Claire directly. I postponed the next building inspection. I paid the overdue equipment installment under protest so the lender would not repossess anything before we understood where the assets had gone. Most importantly, I sent Ethan a message that sounded like surrender. "I've let old guilt turn into interference." I wrote, "I don't want to lose my son or grandchild. Let's discuss Ember House and settle the rest privately." He replied within 11 minutes. The speed told me he had been waiting for weakness. "I'm glad you finally understand." He wrote, "Claire needs peace. and I need a father who believes in me." I read the sentence twice. Ethan did not want trust. He wanted an audience that accepted his version of events. So I gave him one. I agreed to meet alone at a hotel restaurant near Easton the following afternoon. Without Marianne. Without lawyers. And without mentioning the loan, Ethan arrived 15 minutes late in a tailored navy suit and the confident mood of a man expecting an apology. He ordered bourbon before noon and spoke warmly about Linda, a tactic he used whenever he wanted to soften me. "Mom always believed I could build something bigger," he said. I answered that she also believed ambition needed a conscience, but I said it gently enough that he treated it as nostalgia rather than warning. Then I apologized for humiliating him at the hospital and for questioning his management in front of staff. I did not apologize for what I had found. Ethan heard only the part he needed. His shoulders relaxed. He said Claire's emotions had become unpredictable and that she was staying somewhere quiet until the baby came. I asked where. He smiled without humor. "Dad. Boundaries." I let the silence suggest embarrassment and moved to Ember House. The change in him was immediate. He leaned forward, opened a tablet, and began showing me renderings as if the previous week had never happened. The concept was impressive because Vanessa had made it impressive. Ember House would occupy a restored bank building in Cincinnati, with an open kitchen, a private whiskey room, and a dining area designed around live fire cooking. Ethan spoke of it as the first of several locations. He estimated opening costs at $1.8 million, with outside investors providing most of the capital. His contribution would supposedly include cash, intellectual property, equipment, and the value of Bennett's Table's proven operating platform. I asked what that phrase meant. He said staff training systems, vendor relationships, recipes, customer data, and selected kitchen assets could be transferred to the new company. "Bennett's Table stays open," he said, "but we stopped treating it like the final destination." I asked whether Claire approved. He took a drink before answering. "She approves of whatever protects the family. She just doesn't understand deal structure." I nodded as if that explanation satisfied me. Inside, I heard Claire saying she had never approved the loan. I told Ethan I was prepared to consider a $600,000 investment, but I needed ordinary protections. Full financial statements, ownership schedules, equipment lists, existing debts, contracts with Northline, written confirmation that all owners of Bennett's Table consented to any transfer of assets. Ethan's face tightened at the last requirement. "Claire will sign," he said. "She's already agreed in principle." I answered that serious investors did not fund principles. They funded documents. I also said Marianne would have to review the numbers because she knew my trust and estate structure. Ethan objected that Marianne disliked him. I replied, "She dislikes unsupported numbers. Support them." That challenged his pride without exposing my suspicions. After a moment, he smiled. "Fine. I'll bury her in documentation." He proposed a formal presentation the following Friday at Bennett's Table. After closing, with Vanessa, 2 prospective investors, and their attorney present, I suggested the private dining room. Ethan agreed. By dessert, he was calling me Dad again instead of Walter. Claire resurfaced the next morning through her attorney. She had been admitted overnight to Riverside after experiencing regular contractions during an argument with Ethan. The labor had stopped, but her doctor ordered strict bed rest. She was not in immediate danger, and Ethan had not physically harmed her. The threat was subtler. According to Claire, he had driven her to a furnished apartment owned by one of Vanessa's business contacts and told her the separation from me was necessary. He took her phone to reduce stress, controlled visitors, and repeatedly placed the equity agreement in front of her. In the car, on the way to a medical appointment, he handed her a pen and said, "Sign it before the baby comes, or every investor walks away because of you." She refused. Ethan then told her he could prove she was confused, unstable, and incapable of managing her shares. Claire waited until a nurse left them alone, asked to speak privately, and contacted her attorney from the examination room. Her lawyer arranged a short-term apartment near the hospital under Claire's own name. Marianne paid the deposit from a documented loan to Claire, not a gift. so Ethan could not easily describe it as concealed marital money. Claire retrieved her identification, prenatal records, and a few clothes with an attorney-supervised escort. She did not move in with me. That decision hurt my pride for half a second and then earned my respect. He'll say you planned all of this if I live in your house. She explained through counsel. I need a place that belongs to neither of you. She was right. More importantly, she was beginning to make decisions without asking which man would approve. She gave her attorney authority to communicate with Ethan and informed him she would not return until he provided the loan records and stopped pressuring her to sign. His response contained no apology. He accused her of betrayal and said I had poisoned her against the father of her child. Ethan's anger spread through the restaurant. Staff schedules changed without notice. Monica lost 2 shifts after speaking to me near the dumpster. Derek was promoted to general manager and told employees that Claire had experienced a mental health episode caused by family pressure. Several workers later reported that Ethan asked them to document any past occasion when Claire appeared forgetful, upset, or tired. He framed the request as preparation for a possible insurance dispute. In reality, he was constructing witnesses after the fact. Derek complied because he believed Ember House would bring him a management position. Monica refused and was written up for insubordination. Word traveled quickly among the staff, and the dining room's mood changed. Some employees sided with Ethan, arguing that owners had the right to reorganize. Others had watched Claire carry trays while pregnant and no longer believed his version. A private family conflict had become a workplace loyalty test, and every person depended on a paycheck I could not risk destroying. 3 days before the presentation, Derek called me from a blocked number. His voice was strained. I need to know whether the ovens are yours, he said. I asked which ovens. He described the 2 missing convection units and a vacuum sealer from the prep kitchen. I told him they were listed under my property company's equipment schedule. Derek swore quietly. Ethan had ordered him to supervise their delivery to a warehouse outside Cincinnati. He said they belonged to the restaurant. Derek explained. I reminded him that even restaurant-owned equipment could not be transferred without proper records. Derek said a second truck was scheduled for Thursday night to move wine storage units, smallwares, and 2 custom stainless tables. He feared Ethan would blame him if investors discovered ownership problems. I asked whether he would give a written statement. He refused. I have a kid and no savings. He said, I can't lose this job. I understood fear better now. I told him not to obstruct anything or remove documents. Just follow lawful instructions and keep copies of your own messages. I said, my first instinct was to stop the truck at the loading dock. My lease gave me inspection rights, and the property records supported ownership. But preventing the transfer would reveal that Derek had spoken to me and warn Ethan before the presentation. Marianne proposed a quieter approach. The lease required a periodic asset inventory whenever insurance coverage changed or major equipment was relocated. Our policy renewal created exactly that circumstance. Through counsel, my property company sent formal notice of an inventory scheduled for Thursday afternoon. The notice did not accuse Ethan of theft. It simply required identification of every covered asset and its location. Ethan responded that the timing was harassment, but his attorney advised compliance because the clause was unambiguous. Marianne, an insurance representative, and a neutral equipment appraiser documented each missing item, photographed empty utility connections, and recorded serial numbers from the original purchase files. We left without demanding the equipment's return. Ethan assumed the inventory was bureaucratic weakness. In fact, it fixed the condition of the property in time. Vanessa contacted me that evening. Her voice was polished but cautious. She said Ethan had informed her I would serve as anchor investor and asked whether I needed anything before Friday. I replied that I wanted clarity about contributed assets. She said Ember House expected Ethan to provide equipment and the operating value of Bennett's table. I asked whether she had verified his ownership. A pause followed. Ethan is the founder, she said. I corrected her gently. Founder is not a legal category. I explained that my company owned the building and certain equipment. While Claire held 30% of the operating company, I did not accuse Ethan of wrongdoing. I simply suggested she ask for documents. Vanessa's tone cooled. She said their attorney was reviewing everything. Before ending the call, she asked whether Claire had signed the restructuring agreement. I answered, "You should ask Claire's attorney." That was the first moment Vanessa understood Claire had independent representation. She thanked me, but the confidence had left her voice. The next day, Marianne obtained the revised investor packet Ethan planned to use on Friday. He sent it through a secure portal because he believed the investment was nearly guaranteed. The documents were carefully prepared and dangerously misleading. Bennett's table was listed as wholly controlled by Ethan. The equipment contribution included serial numbers matching the units already moved. The $185,000 loan appeared as an ordinary operating liability approved by existing ownership. The packet also described the house Ethan shared with Claire as available collateral for his personal guarantee. Despite Claire's refusal to consent, most revealing was the cap table for Ember House. Northline would receive a 15% interest for services already performed, while Ethan would receive 35% based partly on transferred assets. The outside investors would fund nearly all the cash. Ethan and Vanessa had designed a structure in which they gained control using property, levour, and credit that belonged partly to others. Marianne wanted to confront him before the presentation. "He may sign something irreversible," she warned. I agreed that we could not allow a transfer to close, but the packet itself said no transaction became effective until investor approval and final execution on Friday. Claire's attorney filed written notice that she did not authorize any sale, pledge, or transfer of her shares or marital property. My property company sent similar notice regarding its equipment. We now had legal barriers in place without revealing the full case. The remaining purpose of Friday's meeting was not to let Ethan complete the scheme. It was to let him state, in front of independent witnesses, what he claimed to own and what he claimed Claire had approved. His credibility mattered because every later dispute would turn on whether he made mistakes or deliberate misrepresentations. We already possessed contradictory records. Now we needed his explanations attached to the trap. Ethan sensed trouble. On Thursday night, he called and accused me of alarming Vanessa with technicalities. I told him serious partners ask serious questions. He said I was slipping back into control. "You promised to trust me." He snapped. I answered, "I promised to review an investment." He then threatened to cancel the presentation and seek other funding. I let him talk. The project had no anchor investor. Northline had already spent money, and the transferred equipment could not lawfully support the deal. Ethan needed me more than he wanted to admit. After a long silence, he said Friday would proceed, but Claire was not welcome. I replied that Claire would not attend in person. He relaxed before asking what that meant. "Nothing you need to worry about," I said. It was the closest I came to enjoying the trap, and I disliked myself for it. Satisfaction could become cruelty if I forgot the woman in the hospital bed whose life had made this evidence possible. By Friday afternoon, the private dining room had been transformed into an investor suite. A screen stood beneath Claire's hand-painted mural. Leather folders were arranged at each place, and wine glasses waited beside embossed Ember House menus. Vanessa arrived in a cream suit with two potential investors. Brothers who owned commercial properties in Dayton. Their attorney joined remotely. Marianne sat beside me with a closed laptop and a thin file containing the loan notice, access logs, Northline payments, equipment inventory, and Claire's message. My own counsel sat at the far end, introduced merely as an advisor. Ethan moved through the room shaking hands, thanking everyone, and speaking as though the money had already arrived. Derek remained near the door, pale and silent. I noticed one of the stainless tables from our prep kitchen pictured in the presentation rendering. Ethan had become so certain of victory that he no longer distinguished between possession and ownership. A minute before the presentation began, Claire's attorney connected by video. Claire appeared on the screen beside her, seated in the short-term apartment with a blanket around her shoulders. Ethan's smile disappeared. "What is she doing here?" he demanded. I said any discussion involving her ownership required her participation. Ethan turned to Vanessa. "This is unnecessary. Claire is resting and fully supports the transaction." From the screen, Claire said, "No, I don't." The room went still. Ethan recovered quickly. describing the disagreement as temporary marital stress. He asked that the call be disconnected. The investor's attorney refused, saying all owners should remain present. Vanessa looked at Ethan differently now, not with accusation, but with calculation. She had begun measuring the distance between his promises and reality. Ethan straightened his jacket, smiled again, and started the presentation. For 40 minutes, he described Ember House's market, menu, design, and expansion potential. It was persuasive because parts of it were genuinely good. The danger came near the end. One of the investors asked whether all contributed assets were free of competing claims. Ethan answered, yes. The attorney asked whether Bennett's Table's minority owner had approved the use of company assets and debt restructuring. Ethan looked directly at the camera. Claire approved everything before her recent medical difficulties, he said. Claire's face went white, but her attorney touched her arm and kept her silent. Then Ethan placed the investment agreement in front of me and opened it to the signature page. This is the moment we stop letting fear control the family, he said. His tone was warm enough for the room and sharp enough for me alone. One signature from you tonight will save all of us. I picked up the pen, felt every eye settle on my hand, and looked toward the file Marianne had kept closed. The trap was ready, but Ethan still had one chance to tell the truth. I asked him, before I sign, are you stating that Claire authorized the loan, the asset transfers, and the restructuring agreement? He did not hesitate. Absolutely, he said. That was when Marianne opened the file. Marianne removed the late payment notice first and slid copies across the table to the investors, Vanessa, and their attorney. This is the $185,000 loan Mr. Bennett just described as approved by existing ownership, she said. The minority owner states she never authorized it. Ethan did not look at the document. He looked at Claire on the screen. We discussed it, he said. Claire answered. You discussed needing money. You never showed me that loan. The attorney asked whether the electronic signature could be verified. Marianne opened her laptop and displayed the authentication records supplied by the accounting platform and bank correspondence obtained through Claire's counsel. The approval had been confirmed through an email address created on Bennett's Table's internal server, not through Claire's personal account. The login originated from an administrator profile assigned to Ethan. He leaned back and said, I handled the technical part because she asked me to. Claire's voice remained steady. I did not ask you to sign my name. For the first time that evening, Ethan's certainty developed a visible crack. He recovered by changing the subject. This is a family misunderstanding, not an investment issue, Marianne answered. It became an investment issue when you listed the debt as valid and owner-approved in this packet. She placed the packet beside the notice and highlighted the sentence. The Dayton investors stopped taking notes. Their attorney asked Ethan whether he had independent written consent from Claire. He said the restructuring agreement would confirm it. Claire's lawyer lifted the unsigned agreement toward the camera. This document has never been executed, she said. My client rejected it. Ethan claimed Claire had verbally agreed before becoming emotionally distressed. The lawyer replied that the agreement would have transferred Claire's 30% interest into a holding company controlled exclusively by Ethan and allowed that company to pledge or dilute her shares without additional consent. Vanessa turned toward him. You told me the transfer was complete, she said. Ethan's eyes moved quickly between us. It was supposed to be complete. Claire changed her mind after Walter started manipulating her. He still believed accusation could replace documentation. I did not argue about manipulation. I asked Marianne to show the accounting access logs. She projected the questionable inventory entries Claire had supposedly created duplicate seafood orders, non-existent produce deliveries, and spoilage adjustments entered after midnight. Each transaction had been made through Ethan's administrator account while he was in Cincinnati. The vendor names attached to several invoices did not correspond to registered suppliers or actual deliveries. Those were internal corrections, Ethan said. Marianne asked why corrections designed to appear as losses had been used to tell Claire she owed the restaurant nearly $90,000. He denied ever giving her that figure. Claire's attorney displayed Ethan's messages. One read, Your mistakes have cost us almost 90 grand. and Dad will take everything if you don't fix it. Another said, work the shifts and stop making me protect you from him. I watched the words appear on the screen in Ethan's own name. He had used me as a threat so often that seeing it documented made me feel both enraged and ashamed. One of the investors asked me whether I had ever threatened to seize Ethan and Claire's house. I said no and handed him the original wedding gift letter. It showed that Linda and I had given the down payment without repayment rights, lien, or condition. I also provided a current deed confirming neither I nor my property company owned the home. My son told Claire I could sell a house I did not own. I said. He told her I questioned the baby's paternity. I did not. He told her I wanted her removed from the business. I was the person who insisted she receive 30% when the company was formed. Ethan interrupted. You're performing sainthood now, I looked at him. No. I'm explaining which parts of your story were lies. My failures do not make your lies true. The distinction mattered to me. I had been absent, controlling, and too willing to solve problems with money. I would not pretend otherwise, but Ethan had used those real failures to manufacture crimes I had never committed. Vanessa asked about Northline. Marianne opened 8 months of payment records totaling $146,000. The transfers began shortly after the disputed loan was funded. Ethan described them as legitimate consulting fees. Vanessa's face tightened. Some were consulting fees, she said. Some covered Ember House deposits and design work. The investor's attorney asked whether those expenses benefited Bennett's Table. Vanessa hesitated before answering. Not directly, Ethan cut in, saying Ember House was an expansion of the existing brand. I pointed to the investor packet, which described Ember House as a separate company in which Bennett's Table held no equity. Northline, however, would receive 15%. Ethan would receive 35%. Claire would receive nothing. You borrowed in the old company's name, I said. Moved the money through Northline, and planned to own the new company without the woman carrying part of the debt. Ethan slammed his hand against the table. I was building a future for my family, Claire replied quietly. A future where I owned the bills and you owned the restaurant. The room changed after that. Until then, Ethan had treated every document as a technical obstacle he could explain. Claire's sentence reduced the entire structure to its purpose. Vanessa looked down at the cap table. The two investors exchanged a glance that did not require discussion. Their attorney asked whether any contributed equipment was subject to third-party ownership. Ethan said the assets belonged to Bennett's Table. I asked Marianne to distribute the original purchase schedules and Thursday's neutral inventory report. Serial numbers tied the missing convection ovens, vacuum sealer, wine storage units, and stainless tables to my property company. The lease prohibited relocation without written consent. Photographs from the Cincinnati display showed those same units marketed as Ember House contributions. Ethan said the equipment had only been moved temporarily for evaluation. Derek, standing near the door, closed his eyes. The attorney asked who supervised the transfer. Ethan turned toward Derek and said, "My manager misunderstood instructions." That was the moment Derek stopped being loyal. Derek stepped away from the wall. "You told me to move everything before Mr. Bennett inspected," he said. His voice shook, but each word was clear. Ethan stared at him. "Be careful." Derek removed his phone and handed it to my attorney. The messages were already preserved. In them, Ethan instructed him to label the ovens as under repair, delay inventory questions, and schedule a second truck after closing. Derek admitted he had gone along because Ethan promised him a management role at Ember House. "I was wrong," he said, "but I'm not taking the whole thing for you." Monica and 2 other employees had provided similar statements through counsel that afternoon, though we did not need to present all of them. Ethan's warning to Derek had given the room a glimpse of the pressure hidden behind his charm. Vanessa shifted her chair farther from him. The investor's attorney announced that his clients were suspending all consideration of Ember House pending independent review. One brother closed his folder. The other said, "There is no transaction here." Ethan looked at me as though I had personally removed the floor beneath him. "You set this up," he said. "You pretended to invest." I answered that I had genuinely considered investing if his disclosures were honest. "You were asked standard questions. Every answer was yours. My attorney then explained the immediate consequences. No investment agreement had been signed. Claire had formally rejected any transfer or pledge of her shares. My property company had documented unauthorized removal of equipment and multiple lease defaults, including withheld rent. Under the operating and lease agreements signed 4 years earlier, those defaults triggered a review and an option to remove Ethan from management while the company's finances were audited. Ethan laughed bitterly. You can't fire the majority owner. My attorney said ownership and management were separate. Ethan could retain whatever net economic interest survived the audit, but he could no longer control accounts, staff, records, or property while fraud and asset diversion claims were examined. I had expected triumph. Instead, I felt as though I were watching a building burn after spending years choosing the materials. Ethan stood and accused everyone in the room of betrayal. He told Vanessa she owed her career to him. She replied that he had misrepresented ownership, financing, and Claire's consent. Northline would withdraw from Ember House and preserve its records for counsel. That did not absolve Vanessa. She had accepted large payments without asking enough questions, and her personal relationship with Ethan had helped blur every boundary. But she understood before he did that staying attached to his version of events would destroy her credibility. The investors left first. Vanessa followed after instructing her attorney to contact Claire's lawyer about disputed funds. Derek remained near the door, uncertain whether he still had a job. I told him the interim manager would decide after reviewing his conduct. Cooperation did not erase what he had done, but it would be considered. When the room finally held only Ethan, Claire on the screen, the lawyers, Marianne, and me, his anger became personal. You chose her, he said, your daughter-in-law over your own son. I looked at Claire. She appeared exhausted but no longer frightened. Then I faced Ethan. I did not choose Claire instead of you. I chose the truth instead of the lies I helped you believe you could survive. He accused me of resenting his success. I reminded him that I had financed the building, guaranteed equipment, deferred rent, paid old debts, and introduced him to half the vendors he later claimed to have found alone. That was my mistake, I said. I kept removing consequences and calling it support. You began to think rescue was something you were owed. Ethan's face changed. For a moment, I saw the boy from the dented car incident, waiting for me to make the evidence disappear. But there was no check large enough to restore what he had broken. Claire spoke next. I'm filing for legal separation, she said. Ethan turned toward the screen. You're doing this because he scared you. She shook her head. I'm doing it because you made me afraid of him so I would depend on you. Her attorney confirmed that Claire would seek temporary control over her own shares, protection from unauthorized debt, and exclusive use of the house while the court reviewed financial issues. She was not asking that Ethan be denied access to his child without cause. She was asking for structured communication and decisions supervised through counsel until trust and safety could be assessed. Ethan called the process humiliating. Claire answered, working until I nearly went into labor because you told me I owed you was humiliating. She ended the call after that. There was no dramatic farewell. Her screen went dark, leaving her mural behind it on the wall. A piece of work Ethan had displayed proudly while diminishing the woman who painted it. The audit took 6 weeks. During that time, Bennett's table remained open under a professional interim manager, selected jointly by the company's counsel and Claire's attorney. I did not take over operations. I had already confused ownership with family authority too many times. The audit confirmed that most Northline transfers had funded Ember House expenses unrelated to Bennett's table. Some money was recoverable through settlement. Some had been spent. The disputed loan entered formal review, and Claire challenged liability based on the unauthorized signature. Ethan faced civil claims for breach of fiduciary duty, misrepresentation, and improper transfer of assets. Whether prosecutors would pursue the signature issue was not something I controlled, and I did not pretend otherwise. The practical consequences arrived sooner. Ember House lost its location, outside investors, equipment, and launch schedule. Vanessa dissolved the partnership and returned unspent funds. Ethan lost management authority and the public identity he valued most successful founder. The buyout provision in the company agreement required Ethan's interest to be valued after verified debts, damages, and diverted assets were accounted for. He did not walk away penniless, but the final figure was far below what he had imagined his 70% was worth. Claire retained her 30% interest under independent management. She chose not to work at the restaurant during maternity leave and later converted part of her ownership into a protected income arrangement. Monica returned to full shifts. Derek remained temporarily, then resigned after admitting he could no longer ask the staff to trust him. I respected that more than an invented redemption. Bennett's table survived because the employees, vendors, and customers were more valuable than Ethan's image. We kept the name for continuity, although hearing it still reminded me how easily a family name could be used as branding while the family itself broke apart. Claire gave birth to a healthy boy 3 weeks after the presentation. She named him Samuel, after her grandfather. Ethan was present at the hospital under terms arranged through their attorneys, but I was not. Claire asked for 2 days without visitors, and I honored it. In another period of my life, I might have interpreted that boundary as rejection and tried to overcome it with influence. Instead, I waited until she invited me. When I entered her apartment, Samuel was asleep against her chest. Claire looked tired, stronger, and older than 31. I brought no expensive gift. I carried soup from a neighborhood deli and a small wooden train Linda had bought years ago after Ethan announced he never wanted children. Claire noticed the train and smiled faintly. "He would have liked this," she said. I did not ask whether she meant Ethan as a boy or Samuel in the future. Some grief did not need interpretation. The house Ethan and Claire had shared was sold months later as part of their separation agreement. Because the wedding contribution had been a gift, the equity was divided according to marital law and their settlement, not according to the threats Ethan had invented. Claire used her share, combined with income from the restaurant, to purchase a smaller home near a park. The deed carried only her name. I offered to pay cash, then caught myself and withdrew the offer before she had to refuse. Instead, I helped inspect the furnace, repaired a loose porch rail, and spent a Saturday assembling shelves in Samuel's room. Those tasks took longer than writing a check. That was partly why they mattered. Claire and I did not become instantly close. Trust grew through ordinary things arriving when I said I would, asking before giving advice, and leaving when she needed rest. Forgiveness was not a ceremony. It was a schedule kept over time. Ethan and I spoke only once privately during that first year. We met at a coffee shop chosen by his therapist. Not by either of us. He looked thinner and less polished. He was working for another restaurant group in a non-management role while the civil matters continued. He asked whether I believed he was evil. I said no. I believe you were frightened of failing, addicted to appearing successful, and willing to make other people carry the cost. Understanding that does not make it acceptable. He asked whether I would ever trust him again. I told him trust would depend on conduct, not blood. He flinched because he recognized the difference between love and access. I loved my son. That did not mean he could control the restaurant, Claire, me, or the story of what had happened. He left without asking for money. It was the smallest evidence of change, and I refused to turn it into more than it was. One afternoon, nearly a year after the night at Bennett's table, I visited Claire while she was feeding Samuel in the kitchen. Her hands caught my attention. The swelling was gone. The red line from the apron had faded, and her fingers rested gently around the baby's bottle. I remembered those same hands, shaking around a paper cup in the employee break room while she told me Ethan said I would sell her house and take everything. That sentence remained the deepest regret of my life, not because I had spoken it, but because my absence had made it believable. I had spent decades ensuring my family knew the value of what I could provide. I had not made sure they knew they could come to me without owing something in return. I could not return the months Claire had worked in fear. I could not restore her marriage or rewrite Ethan's childhood. I could not pretend removing him from power repaired the part of him I had helped weaken. What I could do was stop using money as a substitute for presence and stop confusing forgiveness with the removal of consequences. I learned to knock before entering Claire's home, to listen before offering solutions, and to let Samuel know me through time rather than inheritance. The restaurant still sent quarterly statements, but I no longer measured the family by what it earned. Some losses remain even after justice is done. The only honest answer is to carry them without letting them become another excuse. That was how I finally began paying the debt no bank had ever recorded.